NSAS protesters marched to the National Assembly to demand action from lawmakers. I'm Linda Akibe and you're welcome to the Gavel. Nigerian youths continued a protest march through the major cities in the country in protest against brutality by the Special Anti-Robbery Squad (SAS), a unit in the Nigerian police. The Inspector General of Police, in response, announced the setting up of a new unit called the Special Weapons and Tactics (SWAT) to replace SAS. However, the protesters are not satisfied with this action, insisting on a holistic reform of the police. The protesters are also particularly miffed that despite the assurances from the police IG and the federal government, they have been subjected to attacks by the police in recent days. And so they took the protest to the National Assembly, where the leadership of the federal legislature is appealing for an end to the protests. The protesters made their way from the popular Bannings Junction into the city centre. This caused traffic gridlock in the surrounding areas. After walking for almost 7 kilometers, the protesters arrived at the junction leading to the National Assembly complex, bearing placards and chanting their NSAS slogans. However, they were stopped from proceeding any further by the military.
May the soul of Jimo Isiaka rests in perfect peace. Amen.
Inside the Senate chamber, 3 lawmakers come under Order 43 to make a case for the demand of the protesters, especially for the release of those detained.
Mandate the Senate Committee on Nigerian Police Affairs to interface with the hierarchy of the Nigerian Police Force for the reorientation of members of the force towards restraining the use of firearms during protests in line with the dictate of international law and global best practices.
I want to appeal that all those young men who were arrested as a result of this peaceful protest be released immediately.
But the President of the Senate insists that the demands of the protesters have been met by the President.
I think the protest has yielded the desired result so far. And there may not be need to continue to protest again when SAS has been disbanded and those culprits who are involved in the killing and maiming of Nigerians will be brought to book. I think we should give the government the chance to implement those as quickly as possible.
In the House of Representatives, the Speaker announces plans to make provisions for the compensation of victims of SARS.
Many lives have been lost, and hopefully we'll get the names and the lists of those whose lives have been lost and their families, so that during this budget process, because that is part of the resolution that we reached in this House, during this budget process, adequate provisions will be made for the compensation of the families of those who lost their lives.
Nevertheless, the federal lawmakers observed a minute's silence in honor of those killed during the protests. Senate has set for itself December 3rd to pass the 2021 appropriation bill. The 2021 budget scaled second reading during the week, and the upper chamber has slated November 9 and 10th for both chambers of the National Assembly to conduct public hearings on the budget. President Buhari presented a 13.08 trillion naira 2021 budget to a joint session of the National Assembly on October 8th. Determined to sustain the January to December budget implementation cycle, federal lawmakers begin the debate on the general principles of the 2021 budget.
The budget of 2016 was 3.65, revenue of 3.65, and at the end of the year, we had a revenue performance in 2016 of 32%. In 2017, Instead of trying to readjust to the reality, we still went ahead and did the same thing, which is exactly what we're doing today. Put bogus figures, and then in 2017, we still had a whopping 53% shortfall in our revenue. That means that if every year since 2016 we have always had a whopping 50% less revenue than we project, what we have put today, a revenue of 7.5 or 7.6 trillion, we're also not going to be able to realize that. That means that we're going to realize about 38% of the projected revenue. If that is what is going to be, the budget is already at fault. It cannot take us to where we want to go.
One of the key challenges to our economy is infrastructural deficit. When we came on board, we don't even have an operational railway system. The roads are completely gone. And we are aware of billions and billions that we are being, pumped into the system with bogus public-private partnerships that never worked. And today, this government is gradually walking back our infrastructural deficit. And that is why, of course, there is no harm in borrowing. And when you borrow and you put your borrowed funds onto very definite and well-calculated infrastructural programs like we are having today, I think the economy can benefit from it in the long run. And there is nothing we can do other than to manage this particular opportunity, because even though we are in a challenging time, for those who think deeply, they also know there is an opportunity for growth.
We must come out clearly to help Mr. President and look into this budget carefully and ask for the implementation of the budget for us to stand as a nation. Our economy cannot afford to collapse. Our economy cannot afford to look for any other direction than growth. We must put back the economy to growth. Mr. President and his team, they have done the right thing, and they are doing the right thing as of this budget, and we must follow that right thing. Let us forget about political party differences. We must build up as Nigerians.
The COVID funding for 500 billion, COVID funding, not 1 naira was made available to science and technology. Mr. President, science, technology, innovation, and research is a very critical sector of the economy that deserves the attention of the government. A country like Egypt, Mr. President, budgeted $6 billion for science and technology. South Africa budgeted $6.4 billion, while Nigeria is budgeting below $170 billion. Mr. President, the fact is not just budgeting this money. What percentage of that budget is going to be implemented?
Gross domestic product is the aggregate economic activities of a country. If that has contracted by 6.1%, with the following consequences, now it becomes very difficult for you to create 10 million jobs a year because the economic activities are no longer there. Efforts are being made. But those efforts, the 500 billion that was introduced in 2020, and as read by the minority whip of the Senate, Mr. President, the problem I have with that is that those are not most items that are not sustainable over a long period of time. For instance, the public work he mentioned is money that is to be paid only for 3 months. Mr. President, if we want to improve on an economy, you engage in activities or items that are not sustainable over a long period of time, I don't see how you'll be able to create 10 million jobs a year over a sustainable period of 10 years.
In the House of Representatives, lawmakers raised questions over the allocation to the education sector.
Mr. Speaker, the budget for education capital is 127 billion. No country that wants to develop puts that amount of money for education and puts aside 446 billion for disaster management. Education is a waiting disaster as it is. If we do not budget for it today, and not say we can budget that amount of money for disaster management when our schools need the money now. Then you will look at the budget for overheads, which is normal personnel. The Speaker, Again, we have had a budget that has a lopsided for heavy expenditure on staff and personnel issues of the government. It is high time as a country we look deeply at this part and hope that our budgets will show more concern for spending on things that will provide for those that are outside of the government system.
The budget is also predicated on the assumption of 11.95% inflation rate and a gross domestic product growth of 3%, and while the federal government retained a revenue projection of 7.89 trillion naira.
Those against saying nay, the ayes have it.
On the second allotted day for the debate on the budget, some lawmakers argue that borrowing for the deficit will ultimately lead to a prosperous nation. This is as the budget projects a revenue of about 7 trillion naira, while the deficit stands at 5.2 trillion naira.
I hold the view, Mr. President, that there's nothing bad in borrowing as long as the money will be spent well for the well-being of the nation and the people, as long as we borrow to improve infrastructural facilities. There's nothing bad in borrowing. And I'm sure, Mr. President, without being partisan, some of the gigantic projects of this administration takes a lot of courage and sincerity of purpose. The rail line that has been constructed across this country is fundamental to the socio-economic development of our nation. And I want to support the proposal, the budget, towards infrastructure facilities, building road network, rail lines. These are key. These are things we ought to have done some 10, 15 years ago.
That the culture of budgeting at the national level is built around allocation of resources that have been mobilized by the federal government into the federation account and indeed into the federal government share of the federation account. But there is no consensus on what constitutes the development vision for the nation for any particular year and the role that budgeting will play in that. The debate in this floor all morning has been based on this project ought to be given priority, that project ought not to be given priority, and there has been back and forth.
Mr. President, the greater area of economic advantage in Nigeria has a lot to do with agriculture. You agree with me, Mr. President, and my dear colleagues, that the productivity ratio in this sector has been greatly declined, again, Mr. President, as a result of insecurity. We must take security issue very seriously because it's affecting our productive capacity. And if we don't check it now, it's going to affect us very, very seriously.
In the House of Representatives, the 13.082 trillion naira budget divided lawmakers.
A lot of people have described this appropriation bill as a bill of recovery for the future. But to me, after its failing virtually, including the projected revenue, and the money that have been budgeted for, I see it as a budget of hardship. Why do I say so? A budget of hardship because the projected revenue is 7.8 trillion. And the actual budget estimate at 13 points. You minus that, it gives you almost 50% deficit.
I would like to charge the committee chairman, the standing committee chairman, who are now going to be dissolved as subcommittee chairman, as subcommittees to the main appropriation committee, that we must not compromise in any way this unprecedented achievement we have made to reverse the January to January and December budget cycle.
The bill passed second reading in the House of Representatives and was committed to the House Committee on Appropriation, while other standing committees are expected to serve as subcommittees. Ministries, departments and agencies are expected to appear before the standing committees for their budget defense sessions. You're welcome back to the Gavel. Now let's take a look at more activities in the Senate and House of Representatives during the week. The House of Representatives has issued a 7-day ultimatum to the Inspector General of Police to appear before its Joint Committee on Justice, Human Rights and Police Affairs over allegations of police brutality and extrajudicial killings. Addressing a news conference in Abuja, the chairman of the Joint Committee on Justice, Human Rights and Police Affairs explains that the police chief is expected to appear next week Thursday, October 22nd, 2020.
Bearing in mind the importance of the matter at hand, that the Joint Committee has sworn into action to carry out this mandate by taking the following actions. We have invited the Inspector General of Police to appear before it on Thursday, 22nd October 2020. We are also preparing to conduct public hearings in the siege of political zones of the country. Details of these shall be made available to the general public. We also created a dedicated WhatsApp platform with the number 091-302-48644 and 090-756-19076 for the victims affected by police brutality, for families of deceased victims, and victims that are unlawfully detained by the operatives of the default SARS to furnish the committee information that would enable it carry out this all-important task.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives has constituted a special committee on the review of the 1999 Constitution. For lawmakers, the Constitution provides an opportunity for Nigerians to have robust conversation on the challenges confronting the nation.
It is in a bid to achieve for ourselves and our children a more perfect nation that we gather every so often to review the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. First, to identify those areas where the laws of our land have not lived up to expectation, and then to act expeditiously and conscientiously to fix whatever gaps may exist and address any concerns that may arise.
The review process is coming 855 days to the next general election, which is scheduled for February 18, 2023, and the electoral body wants the lawmakers to expedite action on the amendments to the Electoral Act.
The Commission is determined to deepen the use of technology in elections. You have seen what we achieved in Edouan Ondo with the simple introduction of the Z-Pad that enables us to upload election results real time as election is going on. The encumbrances to the full deployment of technology in elections should be removed as part of this process.
The chairman of the committee of the House enumerates some of the issues which the committee would be considering during the exercise.
In order to achieve the much needed success by the Ninth Assembly, there are pertinent areas that must be looked into. Some of the areas are the federal structure, local government autonomy, state policy, state creation, judicial autonomy. It is imperative to briefly touch on the critical nature of these thorough areas.
Already, the committee has received over 15 bills on the alteration of the Constitution, and it is asking for the cooperation of Nigerians to achieve the desired amendment. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives says the increase in subscription by multi-choice operators of DSTV is unacceptable and is insisting on pay-as-you-go system of tariff.
Reasons that we are here. Even though
Speaking at a public hearing, the chairman of the House of Representatives Ad Hoc Committee investigating the non-implementation of the pay-as-you-go tariff by satellite television operators says given the current situation in the country occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, MultiChoice should suspend the increase in the monthly subscription.
Nigerians want your organization, MultiChoice, that they love so much. The brand is lovely, but they believe that the brand will be more lovely if you can implement pay-as-you-go, so that when they are not at home, they can save their money. Nigerians are saying that given the current situation in the country, COVID-19, that is ravaging the entire economy, everybody is crying.
The House of Representatives Committee on Public Petition has vowed to expose alleged criminal conspiracy in the Nigeria Aviation Handling Company. The chairman of the committee, Representative Jerry Alagboso, made the statement at the hearing of a petition submitted by the former Chief Executive Officer of the company, Mr. Baba Yusuf. Mr. Yusuf had alleged that some officers of the company collaborate with criminals to illegally import arms, drugs, and launder money.
As we speak, you recall I mentioned DHL operating non-free trade zone operations in the NACO free trade zone, but suffice it to say, there are other non-free trade organizations operating within the free zones. We have 5 banks, we have 2 international airlines, and over 10 corporate organizations conducting free trade zone operations and businesses in the NACO free zone in gross violation of NEBSA Act and regulations.
The committee invited representatives of the Nigeria Customs Service and the Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria to explain their roles in the matter.
Technically speaking, when you talk of smuggling within a pre-trade zone, I begin to wonder, how is it possible? I think as NCS, we need to do risk assessment to identify areas of vulnerability and how best we can mitigate against such areas.
The committee has vowed to leave no stone unturned in its investigation.
This is a very valuable information if it's going to be investigated further. The fact that Baba Yusuf was MD and CEO of NACO, and these are coming from him, it shows that he made his research. And we're not going to take it for granted.
Committee members promised to look into all the submissions and adjourned the hearing to Thursday, October 29th, 2020. Moving to the Senate, the upper chamber has confirmed the nomination of 8 justices of the Court of Appeal as justices of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. The confirmation of the nominees followed the consideration of a report by the Senate Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters.
The Senate and the Committee of the Whole considered the report of the Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters on the screening of Mr. President's nominees for appointment as Justices of the Supreme Court of Nigeria and approved the nominations of Honorable Justice Muhammad Lawal Garba, JCA Northwest, Honorable Justice Helen M. Ogunwumiju, Southwest, Honorable Justice Abdul Aboki, JCA Northwest, Honorable Justice Ibrahim Mohammed Musa Saulawa, JCA Northwest, Honorable Justice Adamu Jauro, JCA Northeast, Honorable Justice Samuel Oseji, JCA South-South, Honorable Justice Tijani Abubakar, JCA Northeast, and Honorable Justice Emmanuel Ajim, JCA South-South, as Justices of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. Is this a true reflection of what transpired in the Committee of the Whole?
The Senate has intervened between the federal government and the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASU, over the Integrated Payroll and Personal Information System, IPs, saying government should not go into any agreement it cannot implement. Speaking during a meeting with members of ASU in Abuja, Senate President Ahmed Lawan appealed to government and ASU to resolve the disagreement. He noted that the meeting was to enable the National Assembly to intervene in the ongoing disagreement between the government and the university governing body to put an end to the strike.
As parliamentarians, we have to tell the truth as it is, no matter how bitter it may be, at the right place and at the right time. When we sign agreements, we must do so with full intention of implementing them. And when we negotiate, we are the same people in the same country. We must negotiate in such a manner that the final product will be implementable. This is to say that we have to accommodate each other, government standing to do what it is supposed to do, what it ought to do, and of course, ASU being the body of our lecturers, will stand to protect its members.
Meanwhile, the Senate has directed its committees on petroleum downstream and gas resources to investigate the spate of gas tanker explosions in parts of the country. Senator Adiola moved the motion following the latest gas explosion on September 24, 2020 at Tele bus stop in Iju-Ishaga, part of Lagos State.
Further aware that there have been a recurrence of similar explosion in recent times in the same senatorial district as it happened in 2016, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2020 at Ileko Kyodo and Abule Ado. All the regulatory and the licensing authority, like the Department of Petroleum Resources, the DPR, State Stand-on Planning Authority the fire operandi safety procedure and licensing regime of these potential combustible businesses and mode of transportation of gas in Nigeria.
Now, this is where we call it a day on this week's edition of the Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.